Who is growing a media empire based on international teaching? Who loves going to recruiting conferences? And who writes entire books in a weekend? The answer, of course, is our fellow podcasting buddy, Greg Lemoine. Greg wrote a follow-up to his award-winning, we awarded it a gold star, first book, Finding the Right Fit, Your Professional Guide for International Educator Recruiting Fairs and Amazing Stories of a Teacher Living Overseas. His second book is International Teaching, the Best Kept Secret in Education. In this episode, we took a peek at some of those secrets. Greg also publishes the International Teacher podcast with his partners, rounding out the offerings of his content creation empire. The guiding question for this episode is, what tips, strategies, and takeaways can you share from your new book, International Teaching, the Best Kept Secret in Education? Here are a few of the topics Greg addressed in this episode. Choosing the title of the book, what his phrase going digital means for international educators, partnering with recruiting agencies and attending their fairs, making connections, dodging pitfalls, and dragging fire in international classrooms with grace and good humor. This show was recorded on August 15th, 2024. Get ready for a mashup of the Educators Going Global and International Teacher podcasts' differing styles as Greg shares insights, stories, and laughs with us.
Greg Lemoine, how the heck are you, and where in the world are you in vague geographical terms?
Oh, I'm hot. I'm very hot, and I mean temperature-wise. I'm amazing. Life is great. We've had 2 weeks of school. I'm in the Middle East, so it's hot and humid.
Oh, well, we're glad to have you back on. So hopefully you're ready with a going global story that you can share.
I have a great story, and this is for those of you that have been overseas quite a while. I would think you've run into this before. For the first time, I had a summer break. I went home. When I landed in Miami, I had a friend of mine that I taught with in Venezuela, lives in Miami now, and I hooked up with him. We went to lunch, and then I said, hey, I have to pick up my friend from Green Bay, where my parents live and I grew up. And my friend flew down. We picked him up at the airport. So here is, shout out to Joey and a shout out to Ruben. Ruben from Venezuela, living in Miami, knew all about my life. Joe knows all about my overseas, but he's never met anybody from there. So here's Joe and Ruben meet each other, and my worlds collide. They're telling stories. They're like, oh, I remember hearing about that. And then I go up to Missouri, and I hang out with some friends from the Middle East. And while I'm there, my sister-in-law, blood family, and teaching couple friends of mine from teaching in Switzerland, they live in Missouri also, they came down. So I had this worlds collide. I had three worlds, a blood family, Swiss family, and Saudi family, right, in quotes, families, collide and meet each other for the first time and tell stories and all this stuff. And then at the very end of my trip, to put the cream on the top of the dessert, I was going to Target, like a Walmart type thing, if you have it in your part of the States or part of the world. I go to Target. We go into this lane where they bring out your app delivery. In the very next lane is a person sitting there. I look over, and there's Jill, and she's a second grade teacher with me here in the Middle East. We both know that we live in Green Bay, but like the stars aligned. I teach her son. But they're in the summertime, and we're right next to each other at the exact same moment, at the exact same store in our hometown. It was crazy. So I had a wonderful summer, and that's my Educator Going Global. Dave called it interconnectivity, I believe. That was the interconnectivity story, right, David?
Love it,
Right.
love it,
It's
love it.
all about networking and the connections we make. And that's a wonderful lead in to our show. And thanks for sharing that, because I don't know how many folks go back to wherever they're from and try to share stories. Sometimes it's not the most comfortable situation when you're telling, oh, I went to Bali, I went to Rome and wherever. So that's cool that you had your overseas friends and your hometown friends kind of share. So that's pretty awesome. So let's talk about your new book, which gets us to the guiding question of what tips, strategies, and takeaways can you share from your new book entitled International Teaching, the Best Kept Secret in Education? So that's a huge topic, and we'll want to break it down a little bit. And let's start with the book title. What led you to choose it?
It's a book that I chose to write again. It's my second book. My first book that I wrote was about job fairs, and it was strictly from my point of view. It was very personal. It took years to write, and it was based on everything. This book itself was written in several days. In fact, I have no problems talking about it. The reason I wrote it, Dave, is because my principal got me on a Thursday before the weekend and said, hey, what do you know about AI? And I said, oh my God, I don't know. I know a lot of things talking about Chat GPT is the biggest, right? And well, stop me if I go way off topic here, but the book itself I wrote it in 3 days. And basically in 36 hours, I wrote it with sleep in between. But I wrote it with the help of AI. I used ChatGPT to engineer the core of the book. The first day, I just sat at a Starbucks and engineered it. And then the second day, I went back and gave it the human point of view and did the editing from my own personal voice and my own personal experiences over the years. And then the third day, formatting. So this book is completely different because the first one was totally me based on my experiences to help people through a job fair. This one is all about just the idea of international ed, what the three of us do, what we've built our careers on. And it really is the best kept secret in education. And I took that, of course, from our little tagline on our International Teacher podcast. So I sort of wove those three things together, right? My experiences, some new AI, and this little thought of it is a best kept secret because I don't think enough people listen to our podcast. I don't think enough people know about where to go to find out about international education. I don't really think they do. So, this book, the key of this book is to get somebody started because AI didn't write it. I wrote this book, engineered it, but it's not new information. It's based on all of that information that's out on the internet. So, I'm trying to save people the time by going into a book and really spelling out in general strokes. So I think if you are new to international education, you could pick up this book and get a great overview of what we do. Did I answer your question yet?
You did. You did. And you're starting right off with a wonderful tip on how to write using AI, because the three phases that you just talked about, I wrote 2 blog posts recently, and I went through the same steps. And what's so powerful about your book is that your voice really comes through. In reading it, I just kept smiling, going, that's Greg, that's Greg. So that's really cool. So for listeners writing AI, whatever you're going to publish, do think about those 3 steps. I think that's very helpful. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome. It's tough to keep your own voice in there, but going back through with that human eye, and I do have to do a shout out for JP, Jacqueline Millay. I call her JP Mint, a fellow podcast host of mine, and you know her very well. She went back and she gave it even more of an edit from a human point of view. So I have to thank her publicly for that too. The book is not too long, it's short, but it is very helpful. And I think that the other cool thing, David, is if you buy this book, when you buy this book, if you don't want to read it, just page through the whole thing and go to the end. Because at the end is this great 3 appendices. 2 parts are amazing. One is a list of all the books that I've read and all the books that I've really collected about international education over the years. And then at the end, I have a list of websites and different places to look into on the internet. So, I mean, that in itself is worth the, I don't know, $8 or something you have to throw at Amazon. That's worth it right there. Skip through the whole book. Just read the appendices, start there, and then go back and enjoy my writing, right? That's what I want to say to the whole world. They're missing out.
That's why we call it a secret.
The best kept secret in education, yes.
Shh, don't
Shh.
tell. Yeah, I found it fun reading your chapter titles that were often related to something to do with kind of the spy world or secrets or whisperings. And that was fun. So
I
that
tried.
was a piece of your personality
I
that I
tried.
enjoyed. Yeah.
So the title specifically, The Best Kept Secret in Education, it really is because I still think our profession is the best thing in education, but people don't know about it. So you might hear somebody talk about it, but you really don't know where to go with it, right? So this book is a great starting point of general information about what we do in education overseas.
I'm glad that you shared that you used AI in building this book. That's fun. And I'm also writing a book and I've used AI as well. But I want to ask you about a specific theme you have in your book, which is going digital. How does going digital apply to aspiring and veteran international educators?
Well, I don't want to scare anybody when I say going digital. If you're not a digital fan or if you're sick of hearing about digital stuff, I'm not going to give you a bunch of advice on it. But I think that my chapter about that really talks about just networking. And what I mean by going digital is get into social networking. There are so many Facebook groups about international teaching. There are so many different, I'm sure Twitter still does it. If you're on X, Twitter, I'm not that digital. There are teachers that go on and tell you like their dialogue stories of their daily life overseas if you go looking for them. I can't name those right off the top of my head because I'm a creator instead of a consumer when it comes to international teaching. I only go in spurts. So I apologize to the listeners. I can't give you a nice list, but I guarantee if you go into some of the social networking stuff, you will find international teachers that are talking about specific countries and their experiences. So, Audrey, don't think digital like I need to buy a new tool or do this or do that. In my book, of course, I mentioned it before, there's a nice appendix in the back that lists all of the different books that you could digitally read or buy that are by a whole bunch of different authors, right? Or you could go online, and that list also in the back has a lot of websites that explain and start talking about the vocabulary that you need to arm yourself for an international education interview. So if you want to reach out to a school, so it's giving you sort of like it's starting to go from general to pinpointing of where to start. And the digital is where it's at. One other example, Audrey, and I think I might have mentioned this in the book, I hope I did, is that my first book was written about job fairs and it was very analog. And I don't realize I was behind the times when I published my first book because the job fairs are already doing things with apps. So being familiar with an app like Hoova, you're going to go into a job fair and they do nothing but apps now. There's not even a paper resume with ISS. You go in, you sign up, everything is done with an app. All the documents are digital. So if you're comfortable with that digital realm, it's really what it is. It's all digital now. And in person, even face to face, you're doing digital with apps rather than that. So I hope I really answered that. It goes further into the book. I'll be honest with you, I haven't read the book in a long time. I wrote it and I'm like, okay, you guys go out there and read about it. I haven't done interviews about the book either, except talking on my own podcast. We got into it deeper. But hope I answered that question for you, Audrey. I didn't want to scare anybody listening about the digitization of the whole idea. There's so much information out there. Start with those networks, right?
Yes.
Dave, I'm sure you're on social networking with some people. Facebook, there's massive groups out there. There's a lot of digital help out there. There's people like JP Mint Consulting, they're consultants. And I'm going to go off on one limb here, but there's even a psychologist that works with overseas teachers. And she's in Thailand and she works with teachers. She understands what it's like to be a teacher. She's also a professional psychologist, so she can help people that are feeling depressed or people that are not coping and they're not mentally healthy, not diagnosable, but not healthy with where they are. And physically, they're overseas. So, how do you talk to somebody and trust somebody you can call her. And I'd have to get her name for you and everything, but it was in our podcast. And I just remember that it's part of the whole digital idea, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's a theme we talk about a lot is research. If you're totally new, you've just got to start building that foundational understanding. And that's one of the big things that comes through in the chapter. But then when you start looking at schools, go to the networking areas to find out what the insiders say, but there are also sites that you can go to. And what I wanted to add about the veterans, a second theme that we talk about on our show is to start building that personal brand, whether you are going to become one day kind of a part-time consultant or you're just building a portfolio online, to really get ready to build out who you are and find ways to communicate your skills, your character strengths, what you can bring to a school. So folks, keep that in mind as well.
You know, Dave, can I add to that? I'm going to piggyback on that idea of having a social presence. I think that one of the most important parts of even being in a social network or hearing from other teachers that live overseas and administrators is to get the language down, right? To get the vocabulary down. Instead of maybe reading, maybe don't read books about it, but you want to start talking about international ed, going through some of those discussions, getting onto Facebook and other social sites for international teachers, they will start hearing, like on our podcast, they will start hearing things about IB, right? All of these things that maybe are not necessarily as popular in the States, they're becoming more popular, but talking about international schools, talking about international curriculum, especially, you need to learn some language. And once you start having these discussions, your network expands. And next thing you know, you're teaching in Thailand next to a person that you met online in a group, right? And that's part of being digital about it, is that social presence in the group without being physically there. And that's, I love what you said about that online presence out there, right? Your brand, if you will.
Exactly. And building that vocabulary. So Max has just started. It's here, we're recording this in August. He's just started his first international job at a British school. And right off the bat, it's a whole new culture, a whole new acronym system that he's learning about. So I appreciate that you're sharing that idea of building an understanding of acronyms and vocabulary. That's going to be very helpful for folks. So, jumping to first timers, that's kind of who we're looking at here. And recruiting, that can be pretty overwhelming to first try to understand what it means to work with a recruiting agency. Like if you're in the US, I don't, maybe Australia, some of these other countries, I wonder if people do that for public school jobs. Probably not, even private schools. So, what advice do you have to help those new to international education work with a recruiting agency? And of course, we want them to read the book. So, just share a few kind of getting started strategies.
Well, I think the reason I brought that into the book, and I only spent one chapter on it, and I called it the covert ops. Is that the one we're talking about with the recruiting agencies, right? And it's got that secret theme to it. And I put in this chapter the three pillars of recruiting agencies, or the three things you need to know about them, is that number one, and I call them the big three. So there's ISS, International School Services, there's Search Associates, which we call Search, and there's the Iowa Fair in northern Iowa. And all three of these recruiting agencies, as well as the other ones that are starting to pop up, there's GRC, there's a couple others, they really have background knowledge. They've been doing this for years, and it's a comfortable way for you to get into interviewing. And it's much different than in the United States for the machine, which is going from your university that's feeding into the local districts, et cetera. But these job fairs, they really have background knowledge and they're very comfortable talking, especially to new people. So it's worth the money that some of them require to get to a job fair and do all of these within a weekend. And that's the chapter. I could go on, and I did a whole nother book on it. But I think that the number one thing is that that's your chance to really feel comfortable with people that have been doing it for years and know that you might be starting out. The second part of it is networking. If you want to jumpstart your network of schools around the world and people that work around the world, then go ahead and sign up for one of those job fairs because it's immediate. you're on cue right away, and you're immediately going to have a network of people that you meet within 3, 4, 5 days, right? And I guess the third one is it's a support for you. And I guess that's maybe not different, maybe not a third separate one, but I feel it's sort of different because you automatically have support from going to that job agency because they will follow you through. It depends on which one you choose. But I know a search, for example, it's like having somebody checking in on you. It's ISS doesn't follow through later with you, but they do support you while you're there, right? Search is more of a personalized, I guess you could say. And you and I, it's right in your face, but they support you every step of the way while you're at that job fair and leading up to it too. Now, that being said, I know that ISS and Search also have a lot of support online with other virtual fairs, and they have support with lots of background knowledge that's documented. And I do know that they also have panel discussions and videos that they support you with, even if you don't go to the job fair. So those are three really big hitters with that chapter.
So those are helpful tips for newbies. Do you have anything to further assist veterans if they're considering going to a recruiting fair?
Not really. I guess in the book, I don't, but I guess as a person that's been to so many fairs over the years, I think veterans are missing out if they choose not to go to a fair once in a while. Some of you out there are so networked that you don't have to go to a fair. You already know so many people, and that's great. But I think you're missing out because what's a weekend out of your life? If you've been overseas for 20 years, what's a weekend to go home, see family for a little bit, and then hit a recruiting fair and increase your network face to face? It's so different. And it's all in one place for that short time. You can score some really big time networking communities and relationships and make new ones there. I love job fairs. I can't stop saying it enough. I love face to face job fairs because you both know it's different when you see somebody face to face. Even a video interview like we're doing right now, it's hard to read a lot of the body language, right? So you can't do anything better than face to face for recruiting. Both sides of the table, right? You're reading the new people, the recruiters, they're reading you.
So I wanted to add a tidbit that you told us on our previous chat is that you went to a fair in the last couple of years, and what you noticed about it was a lot of the heads and administrators were coming in to kind of finalize the deal. They had done the virtual interviews. They narrowed down the list of who they wanted to potentially offer the job to, and they needed that face-to-face to seal the deal. So I thought that was very insightful. And in a bigger picture, again, I've been out of the game for so long. I'm very curious about, and we asked some of the ISS people in Search this, how the recruiting fairs are changing and adapting. And it seems like to me, it's almost a hybrid. Schools, especially for veterans, are going to do the virtual interviews, but there are going to be the cases where they need to meet face to face. So that makes a lot of sense. And I love your point about making new connections and just building new friendships. And then there's the point that maybe the next time you look for a new job, you would have already met with some school heads who remember you. So that's a big point too.
Agreed.
I just like meeting people.
Oh, I can't get over it. I love going to them even if I'm not looking for a job. I wish I could go every year. I mean, it's worth staying overnight at a posh hotel and sitting around with people that do what you do or are thinking of doing what you've already done for so many years and helping other people. I wish they would just pay me to go and be like a sideline helper. I know you've had Laura Light on this before. I loved that interview with Laura Light. She's so full of energy. I saw her at the last job fair that I was in, and I saw her the day before. She was working with all of the heads of school before the interview process started for them to recruit. And it sort of built up all this energy. And all the heads of school got to sort of know each other, work together, have discussions. And I wish I had been able to go to that. I'm not a school head, so I wasn't invited, of course. But I would have sat there like a little, fly on the wall and just, wow, this is great. Let's all go out to dinner. Let's tell stories about Zimbabwe and being out in Papua New Guinea and Thailand and Mexico and all these world, everyone has global stories, but wow, you can't beat those kind of weekends. I love it. I know there's a lot of tension, but for me as a vet, you as vets to go and jump back into the game like you were talking about, David, you've been out for a while, but those of us that are still in the international scene, I can't stress enough how much fun it was to go back and go to a recruiting fair to see people. And I didn't even leave with a job because I went with a job already with their blessing, and they said if you come back without one, the deal is you can still stay, you still have your job. And I made sure of that before I left, and I was very brutally honest, like transparent with my boss, saying, I'm not looking for a new job. I just want to see where I sit with the situation. Like, what am I worth? And I think that gave me a good picture of myself according to what I had to offer.
So, Greg, I'm sitting here smiling because I write I write these questions ahead of time, and you've just given the most perfect segue I think we've had from any of our guests. Because what I wrote is, Greg, we get the feeling that international recruiting agencies are thrilled to see your smiling face at their fairs because you have such a natural affinity to connect and help those in need of support. So I picture you in the candidate room reaching out to that individual or that couple. You can tell they're nervous, they're not knowing what direction. You sit them down and you calm them down and you offer them guidance. So I bet you these recruiting folks love having you at their fairs. So why don't we dig just a little deeper? This gets back to your first book, but a few strategies that you would offer folks when they're going to a recruiting fair.
First of all, I guess the first thing is go to a face-to-face. Don't be willing to just get hired over, video, even if you get an offer. See if they're going to a job fair. And if they are, say, I'll meet you there. Let's set up an interview because you want to meet them face-to-face. So then when you set that up and you agree to it, you're going to go, stay at the hotel. It's worth an investment into your career to stay there for many reasons. It's just that you are in the heart of that recruiting fair. Number two, and I'll keep it to three. One of my second tops, without even looking at my book I wrote in 2020, I can't remember, but I would say, top of my head, you're always on stage. So play your cards right a little bit, keep it a little bit hush. Realize you're always on stage, whether you're in the bathroom, in the elevator, in the restaurant, having breakfast. There are recruiters and other teachers all around you, and keep it close. Don't be over gregarious, I guess you could say. Don't be prying into someone else's conversation. Sort of wait. You're in the elevator, for example, good example, and somebody next to you, there's two people talking about their school and they're the head of the school. Don't jump right in and say, oh, I've been looking at that school for years. I would love to. Can I interview with you? No, let them come to you. Otherwise, memorize their faces, sort of make a mental note. And if they're at the bar later in the evening and just sitting by themselves, you can sidle up and start talking to them and say, hey, I heard that you were a head of school at this school. So don't jump right in, but you're always on stage, and keep your ears open because you can learn so much. And I guess my third one is network, right? Because you're in the best situation in the world to learn about the whole world of international education, right? To learn about the secret, the best kept secret. You have all these people around you, and that's what they're doing there. They're meeting. It's like you're speed dating, right? It's a speed dating over a weekend, and you're looking at a 2-year opportunity or more. And I almost failed to add one last one. And I know Laura Light, who's a favorite of mine, also. Everybody, Laura, on down to you guys, will agree with me. Don't write off those small schools in countries you'd never know of just because they're not Europe or they're not this dream place that you want to go to. If some little school reaches out to you or sparks a little interest, don't write them off. Don't just avoid interviewing with them, because you might be passing up the best time of your entire life at a small little known place you've never heard of before. And that's in a nutshell, David.
Well, I think it's great that you were talking about how you're kind of always on and to think about how you're behaving and what you're saying and so on, but also to meet and greet as many people as you can. And I haven't been to a job fair in many years. I was one of those fortunate people that was able to get jobs through networking, but I want to check in with you. The most recent one you went to, do people still have a big badge that says, "Hi, I'm Audrey. I teach in blah, blah," or whatever the school's name? Do they still do that?
I went to ISS, and it was done in a couple of years back, I believe. It was probably 2 years ago. It was after COVID. It was their first one. They did have name badges, and I'm the kind of guy that will wear it even if no one else does. I'll be wearing the name badge, going
Yeah.
hi, and I put my country on there too to promote a little. Let's just break the ice. It's an icebreaker just to wear a name badge.
Yeah.
I believe we still had name badges. I'm pretty sure, and I know that all the recruiters did for sure, right?
Right.
And I'm
Right.
pretty sure we all did too. But there were very few people at that job fair, and they weren't even interviewing in the rooms as much. They were interviewing down in the conference areas, which was a safer feeling for a lot of people, but not as private, which I had mixed feelings about. But anyway, I think they're growing again. You'll be seeing face to face fairs for years, in my opinion. That's my little crystal ball. But yeah, I think they're still wearing those name badges.
See, for me, that was a fabulous piece because, maybe they've changed it for privacy reasons. The world is a changing place, but I used to love that I could just see someone, like you said, in the elevator and it would say, I'm at the school in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And I'd go, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I know so and so there, or I've heard of that school, or what have you. Like, so for me, those are fabulous entry points as a discussion and, perfect opportunity to meet someone. So the next question actually is talking about, and I think I better lower my voice, your chapter entitled The Social Networks of Whispering Teachers is very intriguing. Please tell us more.
Well, each chapter of my book, I'm trying to paint the picture of somebody that's new to the situation or in a different kind of situation. So this one might be like Emma, and she's reading about, somebody that's in Dubai, or it might be a different country, for example. And the idea of this is that she wants to learn advice from people, right? She wants to get advice from authentic teachers. And that goes back to our networking, right? So you want to become a part of discussions for those secretive, like that secret conversation. That secret society is what I keep talking about, because there's small groups. Once you find them, they open up and you learn about Dubai. You learn about teaching in Papua New Guinea. You'd learn about teaching in Pakistan and places that you'd never think of. So I think in that chapter, I was just trying to really capture it with the title and get you intrigued. So you'd read about the fact that you need to go into these discussions, and it may not be anybody you can find in your district. You might be from a little town in Ohio at a small little elementary school, and you're sort of burned out and you don't know about this. But if you pick up and someone says go to international teaching, this chapter is going to say you need to go online, like we talked about before. You need to network, right? If you're going into the international field, you need to start talking to people. And it's easy because you start talking to people that are already overseas, and we're already on there talking in small groups. Facebook, for example, go ahead and look for international teachers and you'll find it, and they'll be more than willing to help you. Like this podcast, we're reaching out to help people, and that's what international teachers love to do. How's that for an answer?
Awesome. I'm glad you didn't whisper the whole answer.
No.
That might have made it tough on the editing side. So I'll throw in our website in our library resource page, where we do have a list of all the Facebook groups that we know of that are internationally focused. So
I knew you had a list
folks
like
can
that.
go there.
I knew you'd have a list because your website's amazing.
It's a secret list, but thank you for the
Oh,
compliment.
secret.
Shh, shh,
You're going to lower your voice again? Shh.
Let's continue on what I call Gregisms, because you do have such a talent with words and such natural hooks that bring in your readers. So let's continue with
Sure.
that. So let's take a look at chapter 11 that's entitled Take It to 11. And then you've got a little story around that. But then what really caught my attention was one of the topics in the chapter that you call Dodging Pitfalls and Dragon Fire in International Classrooms with Grace and Good Humor. So let's start with what led you to that title for the book and then this topic.
Well, I guess it was probably my first day of teaching in Honduras. And the story behind it is that you have to laugh at yourself. And teachers know this anywhere around the world. If you can't laugh at yourself, then I don't know what the answer is. You have to be able to laugh at your mistakes, and you're going to make a lot of them overseas. So, going to my story, that idea came from is you're falling right into the fire your first day of teaching ever. And mine was in Honduras. And a shout out to Shannon. He was a sixth grade teacher at the time, and I had fifth graders. And I don't know if I told this going global story before or not, but pardon me if I have. My very first day of teaching, our ride was late, and all the kids were waiting for me. I had 32 kids with all their bodyguards, all of their materials, stacks of class materials too, bags and bags of stuff, all waiting. I'm late. They're all waiting for me. I get in and I finally get them all seated. And the next thing you know, there's this loud noise of a fire truck. And I'm talking like, wee, wee, lights, action, everything. And all of a sudden, I had like 30 kids standing up in their seat looking out the window. And lo and behold, nightmare. When I was in the education program learning about to be a teacher, they said, embrace interruptions. So I said the wrong thing. I said, if you want to get out and look at it, go ahead. And all of a sudden, 15 or 20 of my 30 students are bolting out the door, running down through the hallways past Shannon's room. I mean, embracing an interruption is great, but the way you handle the instruction and the way you handle the students, I should have said, okay, line up, wait for me, we'll go down there together. No, I had 20 of them outside the door before I could get to the door and stop the herd. They go bolting out, and I'm like, oh my God, they're going to go run into sure enough, they ran right down into the parking lot. And the idea was the seniors were doing an entrance, and nobody told me this. The seniors entered the school in a fire truck with all the lights blazing and all the sound and everything. And every other class was in their room. My kids are bolting down there and like jumping around in front of the fire truck and everything. I'm going, oh my God. And as I'm walking back, I corralled all my kids as I walked them all back, and Shannon looks at me and he says, I thought that was your class.
Nice.
So that short story really started up this chapter where I'm thinking you are going to be going into some real tough times, mentally, physically, yourself, and you have to be prepared to laugh at your mistakes and learn from them. Does that help a little bit? That's the dragon fire that I'm talking about right there. And part of that chapter is also to get through the worst times. What got me out of the worst times and continues to this day are when you really get into the local culture of wherever you're staying, and you get local friends. You get a support group of people to learn about the culture that you're in as a guest. And that's where that transforms. That's part of that secret of that chapter is it relates to that magical moment when you land in a country. If you get to know some of the local people, the language, the culture, even a little bit, it really helps you get through your tough days. So that's my chapter on that one. That's a
Yes.
tough one right there.
Well, giving yourself grace, and we talk just like you do on your podcast so much about being adaptable, being a problem solver, being flexible. But at the same time, you're not going to always get it, as you're saying, and then giving yourself the grace that things aren't always going to work out. So for the chapter 11 title, though, you made a connection to a fictional band.
Yeah.
So what was that all about?
Well, but I can't help it. Every time I hear it, chapter 11, iPhone 11, whatever, I always go back to this movie Spinal Tap. And if you haven't seen it, you have to see that. I say it in the book several times. It's just the comedy, it's improvisation. And I'll tell you right from the bat, if you listen to the director's cut of it or the actors themselves, they will tell you that 20% of that entire movie was written and 80% of it was filmed improvisationally. So it is a spoof movie. It's a spoof on a rockumentary, right? Documentary about a rock band. And it was based on the Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and some of those historically like famous rockumentaries that were before that. So they were a band. They were not a fictional band. They actually came together. They went around the States. I saw their second concert live, and it was great. They have a more recent one, Spinal Tap Unplugged and Unhaired. So they have their American accents. They don't have their wigs on. And if anybody remembers Laverne and Shirley, Lenny and Squiggy, Lenny is I can't remember his name, the actor, forgive me, the actor. He's the lead singer, and he's also, forgot his name. He also wrote the movie Best in Show, right? And it's a great. He's amazing. I'm very terrible with names, especially with stars and stuff. But I'm a big Spinal Tap guy. Going back to the story, I had to throw some personal Gregism about Take It to 11, right? So the joke on that whole movie is that they have a speaker and it goes to 11. And this kind of humor gets me through like hard times overseas, like cultural exchange problems. And any kind of time that I'm a little depressed or I have a bad day, I think back to 11 and I think, oh, they have this speaker. And Marty DeBurgi is the director. He's interviewing him and he says to Nigel Tufnell, the guitarist, he says, well, what's with the speaker? I noticed that all the little tabs go to 11. And he goes, yeah. He said, we're that much louder. There's other bands in the world, but we're one louder. And Marty DeBurgi looks at with this very serious, look on his face. He says, why don't you just make 10 louder? The guitarist looks at him. He goes, but these go to 11. And it just goes right over his head. You could just see this dripping with sarcasm, and it's just probably improv. I know. So
Oh,
I can't help but bring my little personal loves of life into and humor into books even that I read. Chapter 11 is just a shout out to Spinal Tap. So go watch the movie.
I could see you running that in one's head in a lot of situations. Just that, that let's take it to 11 in this situation, or maybe we should not. That happens in schools
Quick
too.
Google search, Michael McKean.
Might be.
Okay.
Yeah, he's just amazing. I tell you what, Google it yourselves if you want. If Audrey, thank you for doing that. I want one last tidbit. That group has such a cult following. I was working in Switzerland to go back to international teaching. I was working in Switzerland at TASIS, the American School in Switzerland, and one of my friends, coworkers, his name is Kent Hercules. Shout out to Kent, who's back in the States now. Kent was one of our assistant principals, and he and I would enjoy a discussion almost every Friday at the end of the week. We would just sit down and share little quotes from the movie Spinal Tap. I mean, it was so strange, but going back to that idea of having humor to keep you together, to get you through a hard week, that was just amazing. I had to put it in the chapter. There you go. Thank you,
I'm
Audrey.
glad you could. Yeah, I'm glad you could tap into that.
Oh,
Comedy.
nice,
Thank you.
Audrey. You're on
Nice
fire
one,
this
partner.
episode.
Absolutely. Burning up. So, Greg, connecting to your final chapter.
Okay.
It's the final countdown.
Oh, great song.
On final thoughts, what are some thoughts you have for our audience as we finish up our chat?
Oh boy, can I take a look at it real I don't know. I would say one of my subtitles is invitation to join the community. Please, we're looking for more great teachers out there, right? We really want people to come and join us. I mean, it's a growing, I haven't seen the stats recently, maybe you have, but there's like 1,000% increase over the last 10 years of international schools. No kidding. It is such an increase.
It's insane.
Right? We need great teachers and we need people to take that step and join our communities, right? Some people are not happy in their jobs. There's teachers burning out, right? Can you believe that? I can't believe people are burning out on teaching at all because I teach overseas and I have respect from students and teachers and colleagues and my admin, and I keep getting it. I've been in 7 countries over the last 24 years. I'm in 7 schools, 7 countries, and it just doesn't stop being great. I guess if you also reflect on your own journey, when you get into international education, start writing it down. Start writing down your experiences and reflect on it, and it just makes you a better person, right? And that's about it. I mean, and then I think the other things I say for final thoughts are continue on to the very end of the book is a great list of websites and books about this to read on more than just my dribble. Just go look at the appendices and it's great. I can't say enough about that.
Well, there's a great podcast I noticed listed in there. It's called Educators Going Global.
Oh, have you ever heard that one? It's so much information.
I keep hearing about it.
Yes, great podcast. You guys are doing awesome, and I love listening to your show because we do have a lot of familiar guests there between both of our shows, and we connect like a family. And I know we're going to get you on our show soon.
Let's do
But
it.
yes, I put that in there for sure. I put it in there right away. I was like top of the list. Maybe you're not the first in the list,
What?
but it doesn't matter because the whole list is really amazing. And even our podcast is not at the top of the list. I didn't do that. I think yours is before ours.
Well, Greg, you've done another segue because we're going to finish up here where I did want to personally thank you for the appendices that I just book after book and resource after resource. It's a wonderful, wonderful place
Mind boggle
for people to get started in building their foundational understanding of going overseas. And I would challenge veteran international educators too, who are contemplating moving on, to go and read some of those books and check out some of those resources so that they're up to where things really are, because the international school world is changing so much. Just like you said, there's, I guess, over 13,000 international schools now,
Wow.
and just so many of them. So people need to be on top of that. So as we finish up this interview, and I just want to put a plug in for your first book, Finding the Right Fit, and for folks, yes, to listen to your podcast, the International Teacher Podcast. Are there any other ways that our listeners can connect to you and your publishing empire?
Great segue, David. It's a segue into a segue into another. We are on International Teacher Podcast is the best way to get in touch. The books are on Amazon. You can just Google my name, but it's Gregory. I did that for some stupid reason. I put my full name. I usually only use that when my mom's like mad at me.
www.amazon.com.
Like,
International teaching, the best kept secret in education.
Audrey's doing the whole quote from Kent on our podcast. He always does that. He's like, or where your better books are found. I think that's the best way to reach out. I have a website, and it's called saintsomewhere.online. That's a very personal website that I'm willing to share because all of my newsletters every month, by the way, I told you, part of my thing is to put reflections. If you're overseas, make reflections. I have newsletters from 2000. I have over probably 150 newsletters, and they're basically for my mom and my family and friends. Nobody ever reads them, I don't think, but I turn a lot of those into the anecdotes for the first book. So if you want to see some videos of me doing some aerial acrobatics off of a big dam, or bungee jumping, or if you want to see me eat tarantulas, all these things I do overseas are all collected on that website, saintsomewhere.online. It's personal, but it links over to my CV and resume stuff for professional reasons. I'm a digital kind of guy, but it's fun. It's a collection of my life overseas for the last 24 years. You don't have to read all of them. Nobody ever does but me, but it's out there. There's connections to the itpexpat.com, which is our website for our podcast, is another way to reach out and be a guest on our show, as well as being a guest first on your show, I would imagine.
Well, we do share guests, right?
Yes, we do.
Mhm.
So I think that's the way to best reach out.
Well, thanks again so much for taking the time and being a repeat performer on our show. We always enjoy chatting with you, and we really appreciate your collaborativeness and your willingness to share your ideas and thoughts. And it's just a lot of fun. So thanks again.
It's been a great time being on this show, and I can't wait to have you on our show because
Woohoo!
we are partner shows here. We're going to get you on. I have had so much fun having you to myself because when you're on our show, we're going to have Kent the Cat Guy and we're going to have JP Mint, and it's going to be 5 of us possibly. And I enjoy just talking with the two of you. We could talk for another couple hours, but I promise I won't. And I just wanted to say thanks for having me on the show again. I know I do a lot of it must be terrible editing me with all these false start sentences and stuff, but I love it. You guys are great, and I think you're a very valuable resource for teachers that want to be teachers overseas and teachers already overseas. So I look forward to more of your episodes.
Well, and the same about yours.
Yes, and I'll add a shout out to JP Mint, who I'm going to see in a couple months. I'm heading south to Mexico, so I'm excited to meet her in person. And Greg, thanks for the chuckles. That's one of the wonderful things you
Chuckles and
share your
segues,
joy
David.
on your podcast. Yeah, you are a master. You're a
I
master.
appreciate it.
Cheers,
It's
my
been so
friend.
much fun.
Hi, everyone. It's Audrey.
And David.
We're so happy and grateful that you're here listening to us. We really want to thank the people who follow us on Apple Podcasts and have written reviews. We appreciate you guys.
We hope to increase our reach within the international education community, so we are asking for your help. Please follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your favorite podcast listening app. We have posted instructions on how to do this on our podcast page.
If you like our show and the services we aim to provide, please rate us and write a review. This will help us grow our audience and support our mission of sharing the joys of international teaching with as broad a group as possible. We'd love to increase those numbers in Africa, South America, and Australia.
So thanks again for listening and for all your support. Let's recruit as many teaching peeps as possible to travel,
Teach,
and connect with us.